Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my April wrap-up. And April was actually such a great reading month for me, especially in comparison to like March. In March, I was able to read a lot of things, but I feel like most of the stuff that I was reading in March ended up being like a 3-star for me. Like I just wasn't feeling very passionately about anything that I read in March. But in the month of April, I read some of my new favorite books of the year. Like I think some of these books are going to be so hard to beat for some of my favorite books of the year, so that is very exciting. And so in the month of April, I did read a total of 15 books, which amounted to 13 novels and then 2 different manga. I think that I did just have the one DNF this month, if I'm remembering correctly. It was that Anita Damonte Laughs Last. I think that was my only DNF of the month. I mean, this month I did work on a number of different exciting reading vlogs and I'm really proud with how they turned out. I mean, I did do another round of like reading 3 new thriller books. Then I did do the first round of reading the Reese Witherspoon book club picks for this year. That was a really fun video, but I'm also still uncertain about how that series is gonna go, you know, moving forward throughout the year, but we'll see. And then I did do a reading vlog for a readathon that I just posted a few days ago, and it was a reading vlog for the Tortured Readers Department, which was like a Patreon exclusive little readathon that I co-hosted with my friend Lexi. But for that reading vlog, I also read some of my most anticipated thriller and romance books of the year. I discovered a new all-time favorite. And then speaking of Patreon and the exclusive videos that I was working on this month, I did do a video with my sister that was like reacting to the Tortured Poets Department, you know, the new Taylor Swift album. The video was literally 2 hours and 13 minutes long, and it's just me and my sister reacting to all 31 new Taylor Swift songs. It was so much fun. And then I also did an entire reading vlog for Patreon that was just dedicated to Funny Story by Emily Henry, and I had so much fun with that because, you know, Emily Henry, that's like my girl, and I was really looking forward to Funny Story, and that vlog is about 47 minutes long. That vlog also does include some spoilers, but I do put spoiler warnings on the screen whenever I talk about spoilers. But it was a really fun time. I actually want to make vlogs like this a lot more often for Patreon because it is so much fun to just get the chance to like jump into spoilers and talk all about it. And then very quickly here, before we do jump into my wrap up for this month, I just wanted to have a reminder here about my Trova trip that's going to be happening this October. If you haven't heard yet, I'm going to be hosting my first ever Trova trip to Italy, and it's going to be a 7-day trip that's going to be happening in October. I would love for you to join. I still have 12 spots available currently at the time that I'm filming this. I'll have the link down below that'll have the full itinerary and all of the information. Dude, I can't wait for this trip. I'm literally so excited. It's going to be my first time ever in Italy, but not my first time on a Trova trip. I did actually go on a Trova trip with my friend Gavin to Japan, and it was literally the most life-changing trip of my life. It was so much fun to get to travel with a bunch of bookish friends. I made so many friends because of that trip, and it was just the best time ever. I just know that Italy's gonna be the same, and just so you know, the cutoff date to sign up for the Italy trip is actually July 15th. So if you're thinking about joining, definitely don't wait too much longer because July 15th is gonna be the last time available that you can sign up before the trip closes. All right, so jumping right into the wrap-up, the 2 manga that I read this month, one of them was called Run Away With Me Girl. This is volume 1, and this one's actually a female-female romance that I've been pretty interested in. I just thought the cover looks so cute. I've actually been recommended this one before, and this one was okay. I don't know, I have mixed feelings on this because this is about these 2 girls who like, they had this like thing for each other back when they were in high school, but they were never like a real thing. It was always just like, oh, they would hold each other's hand and they would like kiss each other sometimes, but they were never like a real thing. And then this takes place like 10 years later or something when this girl comes back into her life and she's like, oh my god, like I never stopped thinking about her. But like this girl character is so like, I don't know, she feels a little bit manipulative towards her right away because she comes back into her life and she's just like, oh my gosh, like, remember when we used to hold hands? And she's like trying to hold her hand again and she's like, remember when we used to kiss? And she just like kisses her. But then you find out that this girl is actually about to get married to this man and she's pregnant with his child. And then I also wasn't expecting the fact that you have to read from the point of view sometimes in this manga from the perspective of like a really toxic, misogynistic man. That was just not really the vibe that I thought I was signing up for. Like it just kind of took me off guard. I don't know, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I'm like unsure if I want to continue in this series or not. So like if you love this series, let me know if it's worth continuing. And then I also read Killing Stalking Volume 5. This is a series that like I really enjoy, but I don't recommend it. I don't know even how to describe this series really because it does have like this mystery thriller kind of vibe to it, but it's also just kind of like this dark, toxic romance. I think this book is very disturbing, you know, because like the main romance that's happening is between these 2 young boys. One of them is a killer, one of them is a stalker. So it's like dark, you know, like it's not intended to be like a light, fluffy, cute time. Like no, it is very dark. It's very graphic in terms of like violence and sexual things. Like everything's very graphic in this series. Dude, I don't know what it is about it though, I just really enjoyed it. I just find these books to be so entertaining. Like, I'm flipping the pages every single time, and I've just gotten really attached to their characters. I just can't wait to see where this series goes. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really liked it. All right, so the first video project that I worked on this month was reading Reese Witherspoon's book club picks for the year so far. So I started with First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. This is a new thriller that I was really excited to read because I just get really excited about like the hyped thrillers coming out. But I feel like if I had known the actual premise of this book, I don't think I would have even really wanted to read this. So this is definitely more on me and not necessarily like the book's fault. But in this story, we're following this character named Evie Porter, and like that is her identity that's been given to her. And she has many different identities. She works for this person called Mr. Smith, and it's basically about this woman who's like a con artist, and she's like living to con people and like having all these different identities. And like honestly, that's like one of my least favorite thriller tropes. Like I don't really like reading about con artists or like people who are living under a different identity and like trying to trick people. Like I don't know, it's not my favorite thriller trope. So honestly, like that's on me. I should have realized that this would not be my thing, but I didn't. And so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. If you want to hear more about my thoughts, I did go pretty in depth in the Reese Witherspoon vlog that I did, so I'll have that vlog linked down below. And then also in that vlog, I ended up reading Redwood Court. And this one is kind of like a historical fiction, kind of like literary fiction style of book. I actually just listened to this one on audio, and this one's basically about this whole family. Like we kind of follow like the different generations of the family, but the story primarily takes place in the 90s, and it's kind of like a coming of age story about this Black family that was living in the South. And this is another one of those books where like I don't really know if this was my thing. I was reading it for Reese Witherspoon's book club, but this is one that I personally struggled with a lot because there were so many characters in this book, and I also really struggled with like the pacing of this. I feel like there were so many character perspectives in this book that we got that I just don't feel like we needed. I honestly feel like the story would have been a lot more interesting if we just focused on like the time period and maybe like the 1990s and then maybe like one additional time period. But I feel like the way that this book jumps around just made it very confusing to read. I also just feel like because there were so many perspectives, it was hard for me to connect with any of the characters, and I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. And then as I mentioned, I ended up DNFing Anita DeMonte Laughs Last during this video, and then the last book that I read for that video was actually The Most Fun We Ever Had, which I was actually really excited when I heard that this was going to be a Reese book club pick because I had this book sitting on my TBR. Like I've had this book sitting on my shelves since it first came out in 2019. So I was so excited to finally get the opportunity to read this, and even though this is a 500+ page, you know, family saga, it's like one of those family drama books that's very like hit or miss for me typically, but this was such a win. Like this was 5 stars for me. This is like one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I loved this. And in this story, we're following this family. We primarily follow these characters, David and Marilyn, and they met and fell in love in the 1970s. And then years later in like 2016, we follow their 4 adult daughters as they're like, you know, navigating their lives. And because of the like 4 daughters and all that, this definitely reminded me a little bit of like Little Women. This reminded me a lot of like Little Fires Everywhere. And it also reminded me a lot of one of my favorite shows of all time, This Is Us. But this book, it really reminded me of This Is Us, not just because of like the family drama elements of the story, but also because there's a lot of talk in this book about adoption. Because one of the sisters, she ended up giving up her baby for adoption back when she was like really young, and now it's like 15 years later and this kid is coming back into their lives. And this whole family, like a lot of the family didn't even know that she had this baby. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of talk about adoption in this book, and this kid, Jonah, like the kid that got put up for adoption, he is such a great character in this book too. And I just loved it. I loved it so much. There was a lot of the story that reminded me of my own family. Like I really saw both of my parents in these 2 characters, and it just meant the world to me. Like honestly, like there's so many quotable moments in this book. There's so many times it nearly brought me to tears. Like I just loved this. Like this is family drama at its best for me. And then the next vlog that I ended up working on this month was my reading 3 thrillers vlog. So I kicked it off by reading Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. And Megan Miranda has been such a hit or miss author for me, but like mostly a miss. Like there hasn't really been any Megan Miranda novels that I've read so far that I've been like absolutely obsessed with. And so with this one, I really did go in with like some really low expectations, but I actually had such a fun time with this one. I feel like this one has really great summer lake atmosphere. In this story, we're following this character named Hazel Sharp, and she is the daughter of the town's detective. But the detective has recently passed away, and so she's going to be coming back to the small town because he left her the house, even though he does have 2 other sons who are also police officers who also still live in the town. And then there's all this mystery in this book around her mother, who had disappeared when she was younger and like left her with the guy, like the detective, like her dad. And so some things start happening in the town where like some secrets start getting uncovered, and she's finally gonna find out the truth about like what really happened with her mom and with her dad. I thought this one was really interesting. I don't know, it's not like my new favorite thing ever, but I think I'm giving this around like 3.5 stars. I had a lot of fun with it. I feel like this is a really quick read. It's really easy to read because you're only following from Hazel's point of view throughout the book, so it's not like one of those thrillers where there's like a million point of views. I also just really loved the small town atmosphere in this book and like the lakeside vibes. Like I do feel like this would be like the perfect book to read for Summerween maybe. Like with this book, it's hard for me to rate it anything higher than like a 3.5 stars because towards the middle of the book, there was a surprising twist that I didn't see coming, but then a lot of the ending, I personally found it to be a little bit anticlimactic and like a little bit predictable at the very end. So that's why I kind of lowered my rating to a 3.5, but I still had a lot of fun with this and I would still recommend this book. And then I ended up reading Where Sleeping Girls Lie. This one is actually a young adult mystery thriller that's from the same author as Ace of Spades. And this is one that I was really excited to read just because of how much I really enjoyed Ace of Spades. Like I was just really excited to see what this author would do next. In this story, we're following this character who's going to be starting her 3rd year of high school, and she just got transferred to this like super kind of like pretentious boarding school. And then her new roommate, Elizabeth, actually goes missing one of the first nights that she's there. And so this story is about how this character is trying to, you know, track down the truth about like what really happened to this girl, Elizabeth, and like what's actually going on this campus. And this book is quite a bit darker than I was originally anticipating. Like there is a content warning at the beginning of the book, so I would definitely read that before you read this if you do have any triggers that you're kind of sensitive to, you know, because like this was definitely a lot darker than I thought it would be, especially for a young adult book. Like I feel like it is really rare that a young adult thriller gets this dark. So there's definitely some themes in this book that were a little bit overwhelming to me that I was like, whoa, like I was not expecting it to go in that direction. I really enjoyed some elements of it and then I didn't enjoy other things. I mean, one of the things that personally drove me crazy about this book was the length of it. I mean, it's nearly 400 pages, which doesn't seem that long, but the audiobook was so long. I want to say it was like 16 hours or maybe even longer. Like, I don't know. The audiobook just didn't need to be that long. I feel like I really loved the first like 100 pages of this, and then I really loved like the last third of it, but there was some time in the middle here where it just really started to drag for me, and I feel like pacing wise, it really just could have been cut down in the middle. But the ending of this book was very satisfying to me, and I think overall as a thriller, this was still very satisfying. Like I would still definitely recommend this book. And so it has to get around a 3.5 from me, I think. And then the next book that I read was If Something Happens to Me by Alex Finlay. This one's another thriller. This one's actually an ARC copy that I have, and this one goes on sale in May. This story is really interesting. We're following this guy named Ryan, and like 5 years ago, he was living in this small town in Kansas, and he had this girlfriend named Allie, and they were like about to get freaky in his car when like something happened and he blacked out. He couldn't remember exactly what happened. Like he got hit in the head, and when he woke up, the car was gone and his girlfriend Allie was gone and missing, and he like never knew what happened to her. And now it's 5 years later, and he's on this trip with a bunch of his coworkers in Italy, and while he's on this trip in Italy, he gets a phone call from, you know, people that are still living in the small town saying that Allie's car has been found in a lake, and there's a note in the car that says, if something happens to me. And then there's also like the situation where he's in Italy and he sees this guy who he thinks could be the guy that actually did something to Allie back in the day. And so in this story, we get a really fast-paced thriller that has multiple perspectives, because we not only follow Ryan's point of view in this book, we also do follow the point of view of the police deputy sheriff person who is living in Kansas, and then we also follow this guy named Shane. But I thought this story was really entertaining. I don't know, I ended up giving this one around 4 stars. It's not a new favorite thriller, but it definitely kept me so engaged. Like I read this entire thing basically within like 3 hours because I could not put this down. I love a thriller like this where there are just very short chapters and it's very fast paced. Like every single chapter something is happening, the action is moving. I also loved the vibes of this book, how like some of it took place in like the small town in Kansas, but then some of it took place in like Italy and Paris and like France and stuff. So it was really fun to get both of those settings in the same book. There was a plot twist in this book about halfway through-ish or so that just took me out. Like I did not see that shit coming. I was so shocked. But then there were some moments towards the end that I personally found to be like, I don't know, a little bit underwhelming. Like the ending wasn't my favorite. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I still think it's super easy to recommend because it's such a fun time. It really is such a fast-paced thriller. Like I think you could read this whole thing in like one afternoon if you really wanted to. All right, the next book that I read this month was Death Valley by Melissa Broder. I actually only decided to read this because I saw this book being recommended as like, if you liked Big Swiss, then maybe you would also like this. Because ever since reading Big Swiss, I've been trying to like seek out these like kind of weird literary books, and that's exactly what this is. I just don't know if this one really worked for me like Big Swiss did, but I have read from this author before, Melissa Broder. I actually did read The Pisces a number of years ago now, probably in like 2017. But in this story, we're following this character who's kind of been, you know, going through it because her dad is in the ICU and her husband has this illness that's just getting worse, and she's like not having a fun time. So she decides to escape and go to California for a little bit. And so she hears from the receptionist at this motel that she's staying at that she should go on this hike. And so she takes this hike and she stumbles upon a cactus that is like unnaturally huge. It seems like this cactus like shouldn't be able to exist. And so she decides to go into the cactus, and that's kind of where this book gets a little bit weird. Like, things are a little bit weird in this one. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like this one might have gone a little bit over my head. I mean, something that I did appreciate about this book is that it is pretty short. It's only about 230 pages. I think the audiobook was only like 5 hours, and it is very thought-provoking. It's very interesting, even though some of the second half started to like lose me a little bit with what the heck was going on. I feel like this author just has a very unique style of writing though that I'm very drawn to. Like, I definitely want to check out other books from her, because even though this one necessarily didn't work perfectly for me, I just see so much potential in this author's writing. And I think I ended up giving this one around 3 stars. And the next book that I read this month is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And like, I think it's safe to say that this is one of my favorite books that I've read this year. Is this my favorite book that I've read this year? I don't know, but it's easy 5 out of 5 stars. This is actually my new favorite Abby Jimenez book, which is shocking because I do enjoy a lot of the Abby Jimenez books that I've read, but this is definitely my new favorite. And in this story, we're following these characters named Emma and Justin. And what ends up happening is she's able to find him because he makes this Reddit post that's like a "Am I the asshole?" kind of post, where he kind of talks about how he has this curse where like every time he dates someone, when that girl breaks up with him and goes on to the next boyfriend, she always finds like the one after him. And so like any girl that dates him right after they date him, they end up finding their soulmate. And he's like, I just feel cursed. Like, I'm the guy that they meet right before they're gonna find the love of their life. And then this girl Emma reaches out to him because she's like, oh my god, literally same. Like, the same thing has been happening to her and she thought that she was cursed. And so then they kind of make a joke like, oh, well, maybe we should just date each other and it'll cancel out the curse for each other. What's really cool about Emma is that she has this job where she's a traveling nurse. So she can kind of like travel around the country and go to different places. And so for me personally, this is fake dating at its best. I love fake dating like this where they have a very formal plan of like how they're gonna go about this, you know, like they're like, we have to keep it like similar to how we've dated in the past, you know, so they're like, we have to go on at least 4 dates, we have to kiss each other. But this book is so much deeper than that. Like, I know like I pitched it as if it's like this like cute summery rom-com, and in some ways it is, but I think why this book has become one of my new all-time favorites is because this book is literally so deep. It literally had me crying the entire second half of this book. Like, this is definitely one of those romance books where it's equally as much about these characters and their coming of age story and their character development as it is about the romance. Like, I would even argue to say that this is even more about their own personal growth and like their own personal stories of growth, and like the relationships that they have with their parents in this book, especially their mothers, are just very complicated, and it was very like sad and hard to read about sometimes. I loved it so much. I literally cried so much while reading this book. Like, I don't know what came over me, but it was like freaking Niagara Falls out of my eyes. And I just love these two. Like, this is definitely a romance that I could see myself rereading over and over again. Like, there's just something so cozy about it. I just love how Abby Jimenez writes these characters. They feel so freaking real, but also like Justin is like the biggest cinnamon roll at the same time, like a man that could only have been written by a woman, you know what I mean? So I loved this. I loved it so much. Like, I could literally write a whole freaking essay about everything that I love about this book. The next book that I ended up reading was Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. I ended up reading this for the Literally Dead book club. My friend Kayla had me on her book club, so I'll have the link down below for the live show if you want to see all of our thoughts on it. We had a really great discussion about this, but this one is kind of pitched as a mystery thriller, but I honestly think it falls more into the like literary suspense kind of genre. In this story, we're following a woman who is in her house with her 2 young children when a man home invades, like breaks into the house, and she has to try and figure out like why he's there, what does he want, and try to keep the children safe. And this book, while the home invasion is a big aspect of the story, I feel like this book is more of that like literary slow burn kind of style of writing where this story does have a lot of flashbacks, and it's more about getting to know this character and like her state of mind as opposed to like the action and the suspense of the story. I feel like this is one of those books for me that has really great and strong social commentary on a lot of things, like womanhood in general, like motherhood, what it's like to experience misogyny from family members. I think there's a lot of really great conversations in this book about how like a man is a lot more scary than an animal, or like a wild animal is less scary than a man who's a stranger in your home that you don't know. I feel like for me, the pacing of this book is really what dragged it down just a little bit for me, because I thought the pacing was really slow in some parts, especially towards the middle, but the ending definitely made up for it. I really liked the ending of this book. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I think it is a good time. And then I ended up reading Murder Road by Simone St. James. This was actually my book club pick for the month of of April for the book troop, and I was joined on the live show by my friends Gavin and Katie, so I'll have the live show linked down below if you want to hear all of our thoughts on this one. But this is one that I was excited about and nervous about because, you know, Simone St. James has been a little bit hit or miss for me in the past. But this one sounded especially intriguing because we're following these characters named April and Eddie, and it takes place in the summer of 1995, which is pretty cool because that's the year I was born. So in this story, April and Eddie, they are on their honeymoon and they're on the road trying to go to this place when they see this woman on the side of the road who is hitchhiking. She's trying to get help. And then after she comes into the car, they realize that she has literally been stabbed. She's like bleeding everywhere and she like needs to go to the hospital. And she's like, I'm so sorry, like he's coming. Or like she says something like that, like there's somebody after us kind of thing. And they're like, what the heck? And they see this like weird truck following them on the road. So they literally go to the hospital, drop this girl off. And then of course the police like think that they must have been the one to harm this girl. And so they have to like stay in the town. They have to get like investigated by the police and like they can't do anything. And this story is one that is full of potential for me, but I just didn't really end up loving this one very much. I feel like there was a lot of things in this book that had so much potential that were like really, really cool concepts that just didn't end up panning out the way that I thought they would. There were so many cool things that were set up in this book that I just feel like never really went anywhere. Like I just wanted more to this story. I'm definitely one of those people who like, I usually don't care that much about things not really being fully explained, or like I can get on board for most things, but there were definitely some things in this book that I would have appreciated a little bit more of an explanation on like how exactly that works. I do think though that this book had really good like vibes and really good atmosphere. Like it definitely had the atmosphere, but there was just something lacking in this book that really kept me from enjoying it. So I ended up giving this one around 2 stars. And the next thing that I read was actually this poetry collection called Instructions for Traveling West. And this poetry collection was one that I ended up reading for the readathon that I was hosting with my friend Lexi because it was the Tortured Readers Department. It has been years since I really read poetry. Like I used to be really big into poetry, probably like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I was obsessed with it and I read a lot of it before, and I haven't read a lot of poetry in a long time. But reading this was an interesting experience because there were definitely some poems in this that I really, really loved and really connected with, but then there were a lot of poems in this that I thought were just kind of like cringy or like I didn't really connect with as much. There was like a whole section in the middle of this book that was randomly about like a lot of poems about Adam and Eve, and it got like weirdly religious at times, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not really a religious person myself, so I didn't really care for some of the like religious kind of poems in here. But also like, I don't know, there were a lot of really good poems about like work-life balance and like what it means to be an adult and like reflecting on your childhood and like that different state of mind that you had when you were a child. I also really loved the poems that were like specifically about nature and like the beauty of nature and how nature really makes us wonder about the world. Like, I don't know, there were such stunning poems in this, and then there were some that were, I was just like, what? Like that doesn't feel like it fits. Like, I don't know. So I do have mixed feelings about this one. I think it is a solid like 3-star poetry collection for me, but reading this again was really awesome for me because it really did spark some kind of like love for poetry again in me. Like just reading the words and like seeing the language specifically that she chooses to describe certain things, it's very inspiring. All right, the next book that I ended up reading this month was Funny Story by Emily Henry. And I was so excited. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I did an entire dedicated vlog to this on my Patreon where I like really jump into spoilers and I get into every single little detail and thing that I loved about this. But yeah, this was 5 stars for me. Is anybody surprised? Probably not. This was 5 stars. I don't know. Okay, I don't know if this is my new favorite Emily Henry. I can't confidently say that just because of how much I loved Book Lovers. Like I do think right now, I mean, this could change after I think about it longer, but I do think Book Lovers is still my number 1. And then I think this is my number 2. Like I really freaking love this. And in this story, we're following these characters named Daphne and Miles. And right at the beginning of this book, Daphne is engaged to this guy named Peter, but then Peter breaks up with her and tells her that he's gonna be with like his childhood lover, Petra. And she's like, well, what the heck? Like, what am I supposed to do? Because the house is in Peter's name, like where they live together. And he's like literally just kicking her out. Like he's such an asshole. And so Petra was actually dating this guy named Miles. And so she decides to move in to Miles in his apartment because like he has the spare room now that Petra's gone and he doesn't have a way to pay rent either. So she's like, okay, what if I just moved in with you? And then this is a romance between her and Miles. And it's so cool because, you know, Daphne, her job is a children's librarian. Like how fucking cool is that? And then he works at a winery. But then also like this story takes place in Michigan, and I feel like Michigan plays such a huge part in this story as well. Like this is definitely such a vivid setting that this book takes place in. I really loved this one. I feel like this one actually had a lot of crossover between this one and Just for the Summer. Like I noticed a lot of similarities between these 2 books because I read them so close, like back to back. And I've got to say, I do think I prefer Just for the Summer. Like, I think this one is like higher rated for me than this one, even though they were both 5 stars. I think I loved Just for the Summer even more. Like, I think this one's actually my favorite romance that I've read so far this year, but Funny Story was just so great. I think Funny Story is so iconic because Emily Henry is just so good at writing like banter between the characters that literally makes me laugh out loud, and I'm like kicking my feet, screaming, so giddy. Like, they're just so cute, and I just adore them both so much. Like, she just writes such great characters who feel so real. I think Miles in this book is really what sold me on like loving this book, because Daphne was great. Like, don't get me wrong, Daphne was really cool, but there were some parts of this book where I was like, girl, like I was like side-eyeing Daphne, like, girl, what are you doing? She made some choices in the second half of this book that kind of annoyed me just a tad, but like Miles in this book, oh my god, like I just really loved Miles. I saw a lot of people on like online talking about how he reminds everybody of like Nick from New Girl, which I would definitely agree with. Like, he definitely gives those vibes of like Nick Miller in New Girl. Like, I can totally see that, but this was just so cute, you know? It was everything. It was so adorable. I loved it. It was 5 stars. It was so good. And then the last book that I ended up reading this month was The Husbands, and this is one that I was really excited to read because this one had such a cool premise, you know? It's kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's kind of like a contemporary, almost like literary fiction kind of book, but it has like a magical realism feel to it because we're following this character who's like this single woman living in a house, and then one day a husband just like comes out of the attic and he's like, oh hey, I'm your husband. And it's like an alternate universe where like this man is her husband. And she's like, oh, that's weird. And then every time he goes back up into the attic, a different husband will come down the stairs. And like every time the husband goes up and comes back down, it's a different man and it's a different universe that she's living in, and she has to like re-understand everything about her own life too. And it was just, oh my god, so fascinating. Like, I love a book concept like this. Like, this sounds like something that I would want to write myself, you know? Like, I really love alternate realities, like all of that. It's so much fun to me. So like the premise of this book was absolutely everything. I just don't know if the execution of this book was my favorite thing though. I personally feel that this book started to get a little bit repetitive with like the husbands coming and going. Like, it was just, it started to get a little bit repetitive. I feel like this book could have been cut down a little bit, even though it's only around like 350 pages. And then like the ending of this book, I was just like, what? Like, I don't really know. I don't know how many ways that the story could have ended. I mean, I could think of a couple different ways the story could have ended to make it more interesting, but I don't know. I feel like I was just a little bit unsatisfied with the ending of this book and where the story ended up going. I also feel like it's really weird that for as long as this book is and as much time as we spend with this character, I still feel like I don't really know her that well by the end of this book. Like, I don't really know her as a person. This ended up being around a 3-star for me. It was good. All of the ideas were there to make this a really great 5-star book, but it just didn't end up working out that way for me, which is, you know, really unfortunate because I thought this could be a new favorite, but it wasn't. But anyways, those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. You know, as I mentioned, it was a really great reading month for me. I mean, the fact that I had 3 5-star reads this month that are very high 5-star reads, like these are all going to be probably in my top 10 of the year. I'm just predicting it right now. I loved all 3 of these so much, especially Just for the Summer. Like, is this my favorite book that I've read this year? Like, I don't know. I loved it. Like, I don't think I've cried this much over a romance in a really long time. And so I'm so glad that I found 3 new all-time favorite books this month. Like, that just feels so good for me. Thank you so much for watching. You'll have to let me know, how many books did you read in the month of April? Did you find any new favorites this month? Or what do you think about any of these books that I read this month? Please let me know down in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.